Coming up today, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un backs out of a planned trip to Moscow for a war anniversary event. We'll take a look into why Kim has decided to stay home. South Korea's exports tumbled more than 8% on year in April, the fourth straight month of decline on the back of low crude oil prices and the weak Japanese yen. Plus, 5 days after the devastating earthquake in Nepal, 2 people are pulled alive from the rubble. The hope for finding more survivors, however, continues to fade as poor weather hampers rescue efforts. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello, it's noon on Friday, the 1st of May. You're tuned in to our midday newscast here on Arirang TV. Thanks for joining us on this Labour Day here in Korea. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this afternoon. After weeks of intrigue and speculation about will he or won't he, we now know that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un will not be attending a ceremony in Moscow next weekend marking the 70th anniversary of the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany in World War II. The Russian government had earlier said Kim would be there, so it begs the question, why was this apparently scheduled trip scrapped? Some experts on North Korea have their own theories, as our Na Hyung-young reports.
Pyongyang likes to keep its leaders' planned overseas visits quiet, says Georgi Tolorea, a North Korea expert and professor at Moscow State Institute of International Relations. In an interview with Seoul-based Yonhap News, he added North Korea-China relations are not at their best right now, but given their history and their strong alliance in the past, Kim Jong-un might not have wanted to make things worse by meeting the Chinese leader for the first time in a third country. In an interview with a Russian news agency, Andrei Lankov, another North Korea expert, said Kim probably wanted to avoid meeting with several state leaders at once. Citing the fact that the young leader has not met any heads of state since taking power in 2011, Lankov said it would have been strange for him to make the trip in the first place. Alexander Zebin of Russia's Institute of Far Eastern Studies told the Interfax news agency that Kim would have wanted to avoid pressure from Russian President Vladimir Putin, who would urge Pyongyang to give up its ballistic missile programs. Noting that this year marks the 70th anniversary of the foundation of North Korea's ruling Workers' Party, Zebin says Kim will want to impress his people by boasting about the country's missile and satellite technology. Whatever the cause, Kim's cancellation is viewed by many as a serious diplomatic discourtesy, and some watchers say this could have a negative effect on Pyongyang-Moscow ties, which have been improving in recent months. Na Hyung-young, Arirang News.
A U.S. civic group has released satellite images of North Korea that appear to show a public execution. Radio Free Asia reported Thursday that the Washington-based Committee for Human Rights in North Korea made public its analysis report on the photos that were taken last October from above a military training area located near Pyongyang. Analysts identified 6 anti-aircraft machine guns lined up across from some blurry objects, which you can kind of see there. They have distinct shadows that appear to be people. They are, as you can see, lined up side by side on a firing range. Now, whatever or whoever was in those images was no longer there in another picture taken 9 days later. The committee says the most plausible explanation is that a public execution had taken place there. A North Korean diplomat caused quite the scene at UN headquarters in New York on Thursday, angrily rejecting a defector's testimony on human rights with his own version of events. Son Jung-in reports.
North Korean defector Joseph Kim had just finished talking about his childhood poverty and his father's death from starvation when Lee Sung-chul, a North Korean diplomat, unexpectedly started reading a prepared statement. He described defectors as traitors and criticized America's hypocrisy on human rights. The panel's moderator asked the diplomat to stop, saying he would get his turn later.
How long is this speech going to go on? Because I will give you a chance to speak, but we have a proceeding to follow.
But Ri kept on reading until the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Samantha Power, put a stop to the impromptu speech.
Every day we hear the human rights violence cases in radio and televisions. These #1 leads are just a bit of icebergs among the human rights violations committed in the U.S. every day.
Please shut the mic down, since this is not an authorized presentation. If we could ask the acoustic people.
The act of racial
Please ensure that the microphone is not live.
While he was reading, defectors in the audience stood up and started shouting at Lee in an attempt to protest against and drown out his statement. Power warned that UN security would be called to remove the North Korean delegation if they continued. The chaos lasted a few more minutes until another defector began his testimony and the North Korean delegation walked out of the room. 손정인, Arirang News.
Korea's top diplomat has expressed regret that Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe failed to directly acknowledge Japan's wartime atrocities in his speech before the U.S. Congress earlier this week. Meeting with officials from Korea's ruling party on Friday, Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se said Abe missed the golden opportunity to correct history. He added that Seoul-Tokyo ties can only improve based on a correct understanding of history. Now, in his speech on Wednesday, Abe upheld previous apologies and acknowledged Japan brought suffering to Asian nations during the war. That said, he offered no apology for Japan's wartime crimes, including the Japanese army's sexual enslavement of Korean and Asian women. A teenage boy and a woman in her 20s have been pulled alive from collapsed buildings in Kathmandu 5 days after a devastating earthquake hit Nepal, killing nearly 5,600 people. Rescuers continue to scour through the rubble in the country, but with such a long time since the quake struck, hope for finding more survivors is starting to dim. The 15-year-old boy, who was rescued on Thursday, said he survived pinned between floors in the ruins of a building and stayed as hydrated as he could by sucking water from wet clothes. The woman, also from Kathmandu, said she survived by eating 2 containers of butter. The government in Nepal, which has been heavily criticized for its response to the earthquake, says bad weather is making delivery of relief to remote villages extremely difficult. Korea's exports dropped by the biggest margin so far this year in April, sealing the longest period of decline, 4 months, since the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. The Trade Ministry says the country's exporters shipped roughly $46.2 billion worth of goods last month, down more than 8% from the same month last year. Experts attribute the decline to low crude oil prices as well as the weak Japanese yen, which has eroded Korea's price competitiveness on the international market. Now, imports plunged even more, almost 18% on year, with inbound shipments of around $38 billion. This kept the country's trade surplus in the black for the 39th straight month. Staying with economic news, and Korea's consumer prices rose in the 0% range for the 5th straight month in April, and this adds to concerns the nation is on a deflationary path. Statistics Korea says the consumer price index edged up a mere 0.4% on year in April. That's unchanged from the month before, when it recorded the slowest growth in 16 years. And when factoring out the recent cigarette price hike, consumer prices have actually been dropping for 3 months in a row. The slow growth is mainly being attributed to low crude oil prices. Samsung Electronics has dropped out of the top 3 in the world's largest smartphone market, China. First quarter figures from Strategy Analytics showed that Chinese manufacturer Xiaomi kept the lead for the 3rd consecutive quarter at 12.8%. Apple's large-screen iPhone 6 Plus models helped propel the company to 2nd place at 12.3%, Apple that is, and Huawei snatched 3rd place from Samsung at 10.2%. Now, Samsung's fourth-place share was not specified, but it's betting that its new flagship phones will help the company regain a top-3 standing in the Chinese market in the second quarter. Despite the setback in China, Samsung did surpass Apple to take the lead in terms of global smartphone sales in the first quarter of this year. Now, it's no secret that some of Korea's biggest companies are among the best in the world when it comes to home appliances. But Samsung and LG are facing some serious competition as rivals try to grab a bigger slice of what is a multi-billion-dollar market. Eunice Kim reports.
A press event ahead of the IFA, Europe's massive tech trade show that takes place every year in Berlin to showcase up-and-coming consumer electronics and home appliances. On the sidelines, a petite showroom with just a handful of companies taking part. Among them is Chinese firm Haier, exhibiting a dual-drum washing machine, which it claims is the first of its kind, though it does bear an uncanny resemblance to LG's Twin Wash, which was showcased at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas back in January.
In the future, this machine is able to be connected and you can control it by your smartphone or your tablets with a simple app, so you can launch and control your machine whenever you want, wherever you are.
The race to be on top in household appliances is intense, as it is one of the few sectors that's consistently recorded growth since the 2008 global financial crisis. According to market researcher Euromonitor, the world's large household appliance market was bigger than $400 billion last year and expected to leap by more than 7% annually in the years to come. Korean companies, namely LG, Samsung, and Dongbu Electronics, have carved out prominent market shares around the globe, even in European countries, where homegrown brands had enjoyed supremacy up to the early 2000s. And they're working hard to regain that dominance. Nuremberg-based Grundig has an induction range on display. The brand's designer explains the knobless Smart Surface is meant to create a new user experience. Innovation indeed will diffuse into greater forms as the Internet of Things also enters the mix, and companies in Korea also very much contending with designs customized to the market and by upholding a world-class brand image that produces the best the market has to offer. Eunice Kim, Arirang News.
Now, with a new team on board this season, the Korean Baseball League is growing in size, stature and brand value. And given its popularity, more and more local companies are hustling to get their brands emblazoned on a team's jerseys or its stadium. Our Song Ji-sun reports.
3 hours on primetime cable TV, 6 days a week, from spring to fall. With such exposure, baseball is becoming a lucrative industry for the league and its sponsors. The Korea Baseball Organization became a $300 million enterprise in 2013, and it's only getting bigger. The KBO is welcoming a new team this year and adding games to schedule, both of which are expected to push attendance up to a record 8 million. For companies seeking to sponsor the league, those numbers make the marketing prospects that much more attractive. This year's sponsor of the KBO, Tire Bank, paid $6.5 million, a quarter of its profits last year. But it's worth it, as the companies anticipate to get more than $100 million in advertising value in return. Smaller companies can become sub-sponsors for individual teams for anything from $100,000 to $3 million. This company will sponsor the Nixon Heroes for a 4th consecutive year, after its Seoul-based team finished the Korean Series as first runner-up last year.
We were seeking to reach a broader audience across all age groups, and it was also a plus that we could engage in direct contact marketing at the stadiums through various events. We estimate that the advertising value of the deal is worth 10 times our initial investment, with the exposure we get from having our logo on the uniforms and banners in the stadium.
With so much at stake, experts say companies seeking to benefit from the promotional opportunities may want to consider new approaches.
Sports marketing has become more consumer-oriented than it was before, with the fans becoming more proactive and content-conscious. Companies should make use of social networking services and content to approach fans online and at the stadium, to make their sponsorship deals worth every penny.
Although the brand value of Korea's baseball league is currently 1/100th of Major League Baseball, experts say the KBO has the potential to attract multinational companies in the near future. 송지선, 아리랑 뉴스.
And that's all we have for now. There are plenty more stories online and also on our smartphone app. Have a wonderful weekend, and we do hope to see you at the same time on Monday. Goodbye.